Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a Kickstarter preview for Bee Lives We Will Only Know Summer. This is from Hit 'em with a Shoe, a publisher I've not heard of yet, but this is a game about bees. In fact, it's almost a simulation of how bees work.
That's true. You can tell Matt Shoemaker, the guy that designed this game, is very passionate about bees. He obviously knows a lot about bees. So it is almost a simulation game. It's from 1 to 4 players. It lasts about 2 hours long. And over that time, you're going to be building a beehive and trying to create the best beehive.
Yeah, this is a competitive game because you're going to be building your hive in front of you, but at a certain point, just like it happens in nature, they're all going to meet up and you're going to actually take your maps together. But let's talk about the components first.
Yeah, so you see a variety of things out here in front of us, starting with 3 different types of resources you can collect in this game, which is pollen, honey, and water, which are the 3 things bees need to thrive. You'll see the wild swarm track. Wild swarms will pop up over the course of the game, and they will be threats that we face throughout the game. And you'll notice a round tracker. The game is played over 9 rounds, 3 in each season, with winter being a scoring season. So you'll flip over these event cards and things like that over the course of the game.
Yeah, and then probably the most significant of the components is the player board. There's a lot going on here. First and foremost, you're going to see all of these actions. These don't represent absolutely everything you can do on your turn, but it represents quite a few things, and we'll get through that in a minute. Then you're going to have here, this is where all of your workers are going to start. You're going to get more workers throughout the game, and then they're going to swarm and go away, so this is going to sort of fluctuate. Above that is where your queen goes. There's no hive without a queen, so there's 4 different queens you can have. These have some variable powers, and you can actually switch those out throughout the game as well, depending on what's going on. Then you have your hive here, or
the comb.
The comb. The comb is going to be where you store food, pollen, all sorts of things. This is also going to dictate how many bees you can sort of brood, or breed, if you will, to grow your hive. And then finally over here on the far right-hand side, you have the disease track. These represent mites, and these are going to basically kill off any newly born eggs that might be hatched, so you need to keep the disease under control.
Yeah, and that's all going to make more sense once we talk about the turn structure. So there's a specific order in which you do things during the game. You always start by determining how many eggs you can possibly hatch. You look at your comb and you look at all of the empty spaces. Like you said, you're going to be collecting resources and putting them in their comb. If you fill your comb up with resources, there's no spaces left to lay eggs. So you're going to count how many empty spaces you have, lay that many eggs.
Yeah, that's an interesting balance that exists in the game because, like Ryan just said, there's pollen, there's honey,
water.
There's water potentially in your comb. So you're going to be using these or maybe not using these throughout the rounds of the game, and it all comes down to having enough space so you can get some more bees in your hive.
Yeah, and then after you check for eggs, then you have to feed your hive. So you have to feed all the bees that currently exist in your hive. You have to pay honey. The amount of honey you have to feed depends on certain events and what queen you have and things like that. But after you feed anything you can't feed, those workers are actually removed from the game. Those bees die off.
Right, and those are the bees and not the unborn eggs.
Right, exactly. After you feed the bees, you'll have cleared up some space maybe in your hive. Then the eggs will hatch. You have to pay a pollen for every one of these eggs to hatch. So if you're capable of catching 5 eggs, but you only have 3 pollen, you're only hatching 3 of those eggs. And then you have to see if one of those, if any of those bees survive.
Right, the disease kicks in.
The disease kicks in. So yeah, if you produce 3 bees during the brood phase, but your disease tracker is at 3, all 3 of those baby bees die.
Yeah, and after that, you're going to take a look at your hive and determine whether or not you're going to swarm, because you can't have more worker bees in your hive than you have space in your comb.
Yeah, that's right. Based on your level of your comb, you're going to see 2 numbers. Those numbers dictate when you're going to create a swarm. Now, there is a queen that can create swarms more often. Now, it's a double-edged sword when it comes to swarming. First of all, when you swarm, you're basically creating a new hive. Half of your bees are going to leave your hive. They're going to take half your honey, and your queen is going to leave as well. However, you're going to score victory points when this happens. So you're encouraged to swarm as much as possible. However, every time you swarm, you're losing things.
Yeah, swarming is part of the game. In fact, everything in this game is about some sacrifice. You're going to be scoring some points, but you're going to be making a decision that makes you lose some things too. The other thing that happens when you swarm is you decide when those bees leave whether you want to move effectively with the swarm or stay put. If you move with the swarm, you're actually going to keep the same queen, but you're going to a new hive effectively. So you have to start over fresh. So your player board, for the most part, pretty much resets.
Your comb resets, your disease track goes all the way back to 0, and you start the new hive with the amount of workers that left the previous hive.
But alternatively, you can actually stay in your original hive.
Yeah, your queen just basically left you, so you have to pick a new queen. And anytime you do this, you actually kind of pause your breeding phase. You won't take a breeding phase on the next turn. But you choose a new queen, you keep all your workers, you keep all your resources, you keep the size of your comb, and you do lose half your disease because half of your bees just left. So there is still kind of a benefit to staying where you are. Also, you just might like your location on your board, in which case you might want to stay.
So no matter which one you pick, if you move with the new swarm or if you stay put, you're going to create a wild swarm either way. And you're going to take a look at the wild swarm board. You're going to take one of these hives, and these icons are just for differentiation. So you're going to just choose one of those. And then you're going to create a new swarm or a new hive on your map.
Yeah, which we haven't talked about creating a map yet. We'll talk about that in a second, but you will have a bunch of tiles in front of you. You can put that swarm out, and then you'll score your victory points.
And the strength of this swarm, which is also going to come into play in a second, is based on how many bees left your hive.
Right, or how many stayed behind if you choose to come with the hive.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And now the last thing we do before we get to the action phase, which is really the meat and potatoes of playing the game, is the event phase. You're going to actually take a look at the round marker and see we're in spring still, so I flip over the next spring card. This is going to have some effect that takes place now for the round that we're playing.
Right. There's a variety of events. Some are beneficial, some are negative. You just have to kind of hope and see.
And some of these things can include overheating, like in the summer, which is where you're going to want to cool down your hive and things like that. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's cover all of the actions you can do in the action phase.
Yeah, and the first round of the game, you actually start with the action phase. So all the breeding and wild swarming and things like that, you don't start the game with all that. You just jump right into the action phase. Kind of lets you build up your resources to do the breeding the next round.
Right, so the action phase, like I said earlier, you're going to be able to do a lot of these things, plus one other thing that's not listed here, which is sort of the common action you can take, is to forage. Foraging is to go out on one of your map spaces and collect things according to the map space. The different spaces on your map can provide honey, can provide pollen, various things that you can bring back to your comb.
Yeah, and what's interesting, they're color-coded. You've got green tiles, yellow tiles, and orange tiles. They produce different amounts based on which season you're in. So like, obviously the green tiles produce the most during spring, yellow tiles produce the most during summer, and so on.
And this is a resource collection action. So you're actually going to take one of your worker bees and place them out on your map. Every action you take is always going to require you to use one of your worker bees. Everyone at the beginning of the game starts with 3 of these. So the next action here, and the first one listed on the board, is to scout. Scouting is where you're going to build your map. You're simply going to take this tile bag. Now, it should be noted, this is a prototype. Everything you see here is in prototype form. Obviously, check out the Kickstarter to see more finished materials. But you're going to take a tile out of the bag, and you're going to add it to your map next to your hive. So I can add it right here. And again, like I said, I'm scouting, so I'm going to have to take a bee and place it on that new tile.
Yeah. The next action you can take is to requeen. Now, these queen abilities, there's 4 different queen abilities. They're all going to be better for you at different times in the game. If you think you've reached a point where your queen is just not working for you, you want to switch, you can requeen. You place a worker there, you choose a new queen, and that new queen comes in paused, so you don't get to do a breeding action the next round after you choose a new queen, but you are setting yourself up for the future.
Yeah, that is the one drawback of requeening. That's going to happen, like we said, too, potentially after a swarm. But when you do it here, you're going to want to make sure, very certain, that you want this new variable power and you're not really feeling the old one. The next action is the cool hive action, and this is going to be something that comes in infrequently, but in the summertime, and for sure, there's an overheating effect that takes place. And when that does, you're going to have to take a worker to the space along with some water for every 5 workers that you have in order to cool the hive and avoid losing your breeding phase.
Yeah, if your hive overheats, you don't get to breed that next round. So the next 2 actions are kind of tied together, so I'm going to talk about them together. That's defend and rob. You can directly attack other hives. You could directly attack wild hives or other players' hives. Any hive that's within 3 spaces of your current hive, you can attack. What you do is you can put as many workers there as you want. So I can put all 3 of my workers there, and then I'm going to roll dice. So there is a chart. You roll a different amount of dice based on how many workers you're attacking with. You take the 4-sided dice, you roll them, and then you add together your total. Now, you look at the total on your dice versus how many workers you applied to that action, and you use whichever is lower. So there is a balancing act there as well. So if you only send 2 workers, even if you roll 8, you still only get a strength of 2. And you're going to take that much honey from the opposing hive. Now, if the opposing hive had set some workers on defend, then that total number is reduced by 1 for every defender they have.
Yeah, the defend spot is kind of an interesting one because you don't want to go there too late. You need to have some foresight to go to the defend space. So if you think that you're bound to be attacked by maybe another player or one of the wild hives, you're going to want to put some a worker or workers on the defend space.
Now, workers that aren't on the defense space can still contribute to the defense of your hive, but you have to sacrifice those workers instead. So if you wait too long to make that decision, you're going to lose your workers.
Right.
Now, if you manage to steal honey equal to like half of your invading force, so if you invaded with 4 workers and you steal 2 honey, then that's considered a victory and you score 2 victory points.
The next to the last action is to clean bees. This is simply going to address that disease track that we talked about earlier. You're going to place a worker in this spot and you can move your disease, your mite, down 1 space, unless you have a queen that allows you to move it a little further.
Right, and this also protects and cleans the bees that are coming back in the hive. Every time you rob or forage, you're actually attracting those mites, you're bringing those mites back with you in the hive. However, if you've set a couple of your workers to clean bees, then those bees coming in don't bring mites back with them.
And finally, we have the build wax action. This is how you're going to increase the size of your comb. You're going to place a worker there along with 2 honey. Again, you have to have that honey in your comb already. And then you're going to be able to move your little marker on your player board so that you effectively have a larger comb. This is going to allow you to store more honey, more pollen, more water, and have more bees in the brooding phase.
Yeah, you can lay more eggs. It also increases the number that it takes to swarm. However, so again, it's a double-edged sword with that. So the way you do actions, every player is going to place one of their workers in one of those spots, or multiple if you're doing something like the rob action where you could place more at one time. Once every player has taken an action, then any wild hives that are on the board are going to act as well. And they follow a scripted AI that comes with an AI card. Their actions are a little different based on which season you're in the game, but those wild hives are going to do things like forage, which will block spots from you. They're going to try to rob you, and they're going to maybe even scout for you as well.
So yeah, you really want to treat those wild hives almost like they're other players because the AI that's baked into the game is going to fluctuate, it's going to change, they're going to do different things, and you have to be prepared for it. That's why that defense space is not only for other players, but also for those wild hives.
Yeah, and once every player has finished their actions, the wild hive does not get a free action at the end. Once the last person has placed their last worker, that's the end of the round. You just go straight into cleanup, you take all your workers back, you return all the wild hive markers back to their hives, and that's the end of the round. You're going to reset back to the start again, which was that egg phase. However, if you are just finishing spring, this is the phase in which you actually discover the other hives around you. So for the 3 rounds of spring, you're kind of building your own little board, but during spring, you're actually connecting all your boards together into one bigger map. So starting with the first player, you look at what you've discovered so far, you choose another player around the table, and you're going to connect your map to their map, and then you're just going to go around the table until you have one shared map.
Yeah, and if you hadn't guessed, when you do that, the game becomes a far more interactive experience because your hives are going to be closer to your other players' hives, so there's going to be a lot more attacking going on between the players at the table.
Yeah, and we're going to repeat those actions. There's 9 rounds in the game. We're going to keep going through this: spring, summer, fall, and then winter is the scoring phase. During winter, you have to make sure that all of your bees survive winter. If you do, you're going to get bonus points at the end of the game for every bee that survives and every resource, every honey that you still have in your hive at the end of the game.
Yeah, and so the high score wins, obviously. You're going to have points throughout the game for swarming, for attacking other hives, and then those end-of-game scoring points that Ryan just mentioned. Now, you're going to just play through 1 year or 1 season, if you will, but there are rules that allow you to play multiple years if you want a longer game.
Yeah, if you want a longer, like more of a simulation-style game, you can play through as many years as you want. There's also a solo mode to the game, which has you going through those years. I think seeing how many years you can survive even is one of the things you can do during the solo mode.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This game has a lot going on. It definitely feels like a simulation, and I have to say it feels pretty educational as well as you play
I definitely learned a lot more about a bee's life. Even like the title of the game is a dedication. Bees are born and die during summer, most of the worker bees. They only ever see that one season. I think it's nice to kind of name the game that way as a tribute. So this is a guy that obviously loves this subject a lot.
Yeah, certainly passionate about it.
So that is Bee Lives. It is on Kickstarter right now, so go head over, see the final components, see what they're offering, come back here and leave comments, ask any questions, and as always, please like us, subscribe, follow us on Twitter, check out all of our new videos, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.